by striping, or whatever.
Herb Baumeister of Carmel saw it all.
I said to my son, they're gonna hit that raccoon with the spray gun, and sure enough, they just striped right over its face and neck. Didn't even move it, no effort to, get it out of the way. So I happened to have a Polaroid with me, so I took a shot at the thing.
A raccoon, which met its demise on the yellow line, became one with the paint. The raccoon has since been removed. This is all that's left.
This was just, the painter should have had a chalk line drawn around his career by state officials. There was no excuse for that. I mean, the poor thing deserved a better fate than that.
Way.
What a shame. It would have taken just a second to kick that thing or move it somehow out of the way. It deserved a better fate than that.
On the north side, Rick Dawson, Wish TV, News 8.
In the footage you just saw, Herb Baumeister, in front of his property, Fox Hollow Farm, was just telling the news about how he noticed a raccoon that was spray painted over by a road team painting the road. You may ask, what does this have to do with anything? Well, that man, Herb Baumeister, is an American serial killer. This interview was done in 1994, but between the early 80s and the mid-90s, he killed at least 11 people confirmed, but he's believed to have killed many more. On his property, Fox Hollow Farm, he strangled victims to death that he lured there. But he's also believed to be the I-70 Strangler, which between the years 1980 and 1991, at least 12 boys and men were found dead along I-70 between Ohio and Indiana. So how did Herb Baumeister hide in plain sight for so many years? And what became of Herb Baumeister? Well, in this video, I'll go into a few details. In the late 1980s, Herb Baumeister opened a store called Save-A-Lot, a thrift store that had a lot of success and made him essentially a millionaire. In the beginning, he had a hard work ethic, and the store was very successful and actually was able to open another location. But by the mid-90s, his work ethic had fallen. Employees said that he would not even show up some days, and the business was failing. He was going into bankruptcy, and his wife was about to divorce him. In the summer of 1996, investigators were on to Herb Baumeister, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. Before they could get him, he fled to Canada. And on July 3rd, 1996, he was found dead in a park in Ontario, Canada, with a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Next to him was a suicide note, but the note claimed nothing about the murders, only that his reason for suicide was because of the failing business, the bankruptcy, and the divorce. Just like that, all the secrets died with Herb Baumeister. People who knew Herb Baumeister said he had a hard work ethic, but at the same time he was also an oddball and had a lot of weird tendencies, and most people just tried to avoid him at all costs. Before he opened the Save-A-Lot thrift store in 1988, he worked for the Bureau of Motor Vehicles in Indiana, and he worked his way up to become a field director. But he was fired in 1985 because he urinated on a letter that was going to be sent to the governor of Indiana. Just weird things like this made him such an oddball that people just didn't really know who this guy was. But his hard work ethic, most of the time, kept him in a job. With the success of his Save-A-Lot thrift store, Herb Baumeister was able to purchase the Fox Hollow Farm estate just outside Indianapolis, Indiana. He was married and had 2 kids, and during the summer months they often went on summer vacations. Herb would stay behind claiming he had to tend to the business. He had the property all to himself. He would lure victims back to the house, strangle them to death, and then discard their remains in his backyard, where they are still being found to this day. Herb Baumeister would oftentimes visit gay bars in downtown Indianapolis and lure victims back to his house with the promise of hanging out and swimming in the pool. There are many theories that believe Herb Baumeister was actually gay himself, and he just couldn't come out because of the circumstances around his family. Others claim he just targeted the gay community because at the time, Not much thought would go into a gay person going missing in a city. Either way, Herb did this for years under the radar, and no one ever suspected him of anything. Herb Baumeister would eventually slip up, and it was when he let one of his victims get away. A man who went by the name Tony Harris had a friend go missing at one of the clubs. His friend Roger. He really wanted to find out what happened to Roger, and he would hang out at the club waiting for a clue, anything that would lead him to what happened to Roger. One night, Tony met a man named Brian Smart. Brian Smart asked him if he wanted to come back to a property that his boss owned that had a pool. Tony, thinking this could lead to something, agreed and went with Brian Smart back to his property, the Fox Hollow Farm. In the pool, during a sexual encounter, Tony claims that he feels like Brian tried to strangle him. But Brian let go when Tony demanded him and believed that he was on to him. Brian Smart let him go. About a year later, Tony saw Brian Smart again at the club. Brian ran out the club, trying to avoid Tony. Tony went outside and captured his license plate. He reported it to the police. The police ran the plate and it came back to Herb Baumeister, not Brian Smart. Herb was using the name Brian Smart to fly under the radar. Eventually, police would get permission from Herb Baumeister's wife to search the property when Herb was away on business. And what they found were human remains. Herb was tipped off that the police had a warrant for his arrest, and he fled. And on July 3rd, 1996, he was found dead of a self-inflicted gunshot wound in a park in Ontario, Canada. So that should be where the story ends. The serial killer was discovered. His victims were found. And this was 26 years ago when it all ended. Well, that's not the case. To this day, there are still new searches going on. Just this month, December of 2022, cadaver dogs hit on many locations on the property in a renewed search, and they are still finding human remains to this day of unidentified victims. People have claimed that the Fox Hollow Farm is filled with paranormal activity. From the victims of Herb Baumeister, people claim to see apparitions walking around the woods and on the property and seeing weird things occur. People also claim that the spirit of Herb Baumeister himself is on the property and that he's looking for victims in the afterlife. People claim to have felt hands around their neck as if Herb was trying to strangle them. The property has been featured in paranormal TV shows, such as Paranormal Witness on the Sci-Fi Channel and also Ghost Adventures on the Travel Channel. Many people wonder, is Herb Baumeister still here? Are many of his victims still here? As the area has been built up a lot in the last 26 years, there are housing developments all around what used to be a strong wooded area. But still, to this day, they are still searching for the missing. We may never know the extent of Herb Baumeister's murders, because when he committed suicide in 1996, he took all his secrets to the grave. During the 1980s and 1990s, a lot of gay men that came out were disowned by their families and were essentially forgotten about. And when they would disappear, no one would think much of it. And that is why today there were so many unidentified victims that could possibly be buried here on Fox Hollow Farm. As of today, 2022, investigators are still looking for anyone who's had anyone go missing in the 80s or 90s in the area to come forward with a DNA sample so they can test them against remains they found, hopefully to bring an identification to a victim and lay them to rest. The case of Herb Baumeister really makes you realize that anyone you come across in daily life could be anyone. You never really know their secrets. You never really know what they've done or what they're hiding. There are always going to be serial killers that walk among us, that think they are invincible, that think they have got away with the crime. Some of them will get away with the crime and die without ever being prosecuted, without ever being found guilty, while others will eventually be discovered. We see this in cases such as the Golden State Killer in California, a man who essentially thought he got away with murder, and in his 70s, because of a DNA profile, was able to be found guilty and convicted of being a serial killer. The truth is, we just never know. We never know who anyone really is. But in the case of Herb Baumeister and the Fox Hollow Farm, we know that this man was truly evil. Thank you for watching, guys. Until next time, this is Fixed Image. Saying peace.